The airline industry has become a symbol of rough and tumble competition. One airline that stands out in weathering this storm is American. Some voice concerns about whether American would be a survivor after deregulation. American has not only survived, but prospered. Now, how has American achieved this superior performance? Well, since deregulation, there's been a tremendous increase in rivalry in the airline industry. Most airlines, both old and new, have been preoccupied with one thing: cost. But American decided on another course. It set out to be the differentiated airline, to provide superior value to its customers. American had to reduce costs to respond to the new environment, but it did so in an imaginative way which did not undermine its ability to differentiate. American aggressively expanded its route system nationally and internationally, including many new pleasure destinations. Growth was vital to its approach to cost control. By the mid-1980s, American had firmly staked out the position as the broad differentiator of the U.S. airline industry. A positioning concept is one thing, but how do you translate it into a strategy? There are literally hundreds of things that an airline could try to do to differentiate, and it's impossible to differentiate on everything. American has chosen to concentrate on a few areas where it wants to be truly unique. The first is onboard service. American believes that this is the single biggest factor in customer satisfaction and works to consistently provide the warmest, most professional service of any airline. Another vital area is on-time departures and arrivals. American recognizes that this is one of the most important things to any passengers. Do you get there in time? American has the #1 record in this regard in Department of Transportation surveys. Another important area is overbooking, a chronic problem in the airline industry today. Passengers get bumped every day, and nothing is more disruptive to a traveler's schedule than being bumped. I can tell you from personal experience. Thanks to state-of-the-art technology, however, American Airlines has fewer passengers involuntarily denied seats than any other airline. But American has another customer, the travel agent. The travel agent is the crucial marketing arm for American Airlines and the airline industry. In fact, travel agents account for about 80% of Americans' total revenues in every year. Now, sometimes companies have a tendency to look at their distribution channel as a necessary evil, somebody they've got to deal with. But effective differentiators don't see it this way. They differentiate with their channel just as much as they try to differentiate with that ultimate customer. The principal tool American uses to differentiate itself with a travel agent is the so-called SABRE system. That's that little box here. This box is an American Airlines computer terminal, and it's sitting here inside Crimson Travel. SABRE allows the travel agent to automate the process of making reservations and issuing tickets. By moving early to provide this service, American not only gained a preferred relationship with its distribution channels, but it created a profitable business in its own right. Creating a superior product or service is only the first part, although a big one, of a differentiation strategy. A successful differentiator must also communicate its superiority to its potential customers. This communication must be clear and it must be credible. It must be believable. American seeks to communicate its differentiation strategy in a number of ways. The first is advertising. Like all airlines, American is a major advertiser on television and newspapers. An essential part of communicating differentiation is paying particular attention to repeat customers. In May of 1981, American pioneered frequent traveler programs in the airline industry. American's program was named Advantage.
Since we felt we had a greater franchise with a very frequent traveler than most of our competitors, we felt a rewards program such as Advantage would be the ultimate lock. Now, naturally, awarding free travel is something that is very fundable by an airline or any airline, and that you typically run 60 to 65% full. Wonderful win-win environment for both American and the frequent traveler.
After creating and communicating superior value, the final part of the differentiation equation is pricing. Differentiation must be reflected in either higher prices or growing market share in order to translate into superior performance. American's been in a environment over the last 6 or 7 years that has been marked by some of the most vigorous, shall we say, price warfare of any industry I've ever worked in or worked around. And yet Americans trying to be the differentiator. I think it's very interesting to understand how American has tried to cope with this unusual problem. Could we start by talking a little bit about why American introduced the Super Saver concept of pricing?
Sure, Mike. We first came up with the concept of the Super Saver fare to really satisfy, well, several needs. One was a need to share in a larger percentage of the growing discretionary travel market. We also realized, though, that we were running fairly healthy load factors, maybe 60% in those days, with higher paying passengers, and we didn't want to have all that business walk away from us through an across-the-board price cut. So with the application of some technology, the first steps into a yield management environment, which many people have talked about is something that's newly and very exotic in this business, we really placed through putting some constraints around the applicability of the fare itself, as well as how much inventory we made available for that fare. We allowed ourselves to draw in a hunk of the low fare market, but preserve the high end of the market as well, thereby increasing the revenue contribution from each trip.
The Super Saver fare is an imaginative way to counter price competitors while preserving the fruits of differentiation. American also employs sophisticated computer technology to capture the greatest amount of revenue from its differentiated position.
What we attempt to do is to generate an overall plane load maximization of revenues by allocating different numbers of seats to the different fare classifications being offered. In essence, we'll sell so many at the very cheap rate, but also realizing that there are a significant number of people, because we are a good airline, who will put pressure on our seats at the last minute and pay a higher price for the scheduled convenience.
To turn its strategy into reality, American performs a number of other vital activities. The first is measurement. It's very hard to achieve superior service unless you measure carefully how well you're doing. Most good differentiators set explicit standards for performance and track progress against them on a continuous basis. American's no exception. It has standards for literally everything, from how long baggage is supposed to take to get to you to the length of your wait in line. Since 1984, American has conducted a continuous in-flight survey which tracks 21 areas of service quality. It has 280 so-called quality shoppers who continuously monitor service quality throughout the American system. Another essential part of implementing American's differentiation strategy is recruiting and training. To make superior service a reality, the rubber meets the road through Americans' people. They need the right skills and, even more importantly, the right attitudes. The second key to making differentiation a reality at American Airlines is the relationship it has established with its employees. American has sought to build a relationship of mutual respect and trust. When other airlines were implementing draconian wage cuts, American pioneered the two-tiered wage system that allowed it to reduce its labor costs through growth. New employees were paid at a lower scale, reflecting current market conditions. As American expanded employment, its average wage costs went down. But there remains one final crucial tool for implementing American's differentiation strategy that we have not yet addressed, and that area is technology. Perhaps the best single example is the Sabre system that I discussed earlier. Sabre is the largest civilian real-time data processing network in the United States, maybe even the world. It involves a cumulative investment of over $400 million. American has poured money into the Sabre technology in order to allow a lot of this fancy reservations, this relationship with the travel agent, and many of the other things I discussed. And this sort of thing permeates the American organization. Little pieces of technology all through the business, like an automated baggage handling system and others, that allow American to achieve this superior performance all through the business. Let's go back to this basic choice of American to try to set itself apart on quality of service. And I like to use the word differentiation because it connotes a broader package of things to set the company apart. Why haven't competitors been able to emulate American?
Well, I think it's important, Mike, to keep in mind that competitors regularly do seek to emulate America. I think the issue more than perhaps it's long-term coherence is the best way to characterize it. We've had a corporate commitment to move in that direction for a long time. That is a commitment that is shared at many levels of management, is widely understood. As a consequence, I think we are much more consistent at applying it.
Yeah, it's striking how often the truly successful company at carrying out a strategy is one that's really been doing it for a rather long time.
Well, I think the issue here, as much as anything else, because it's a service business and because it is so people dependent, certainly the one thing that I think everybody in the industry would agree we have done with great consistency is communicate effectively and broadly with our people. We've told them what the plan is. We've explained how we're doing against the plan. We've explained the problems and the new approaches.
How much of your own time have you spent doing that?
Well, at least a third of my time is spent in things that I would characterize as primarily communication exercises.
After deregulation, the whole cost level in the airline industry has been kind of rocketing downward. What's American done to deal with the problem of cost?
We've done a whole variety of things. I suppose the first thing we did is we took a very serious look at the manufacturing plant, in our case the fleet. And in the mid-'70s to the mid-'80s, we made some very major transformations. We got rid of whole fleets of airplanes. Secondly, we made some very major changes in where we put the fleet. That is the route structure, whereas we used to fly a lot of point-to-point operations. All the carriers during this period of time have moved towards the hub-and-spoke operation. We moved earlier and more aggressively than most, and as a consequence, that had a very favorable effect on both our unit costs and our unit revenues.
How do you seriously cut costs without undermining quality and differentiation?
And let me say first that I think that the notion of cutting costs in a service business as opposed to a manufacturing business without having any effect on product quality is probably something you cannot do. On the other hand, when you begin to look seriously, you always find costs that are embedded in past practice and in culture that can be made to go away because they don't make any contribution to real quality. And there are hundreds of those things. Some of the onboard service features. I mean, do you need 3 pieces of linen as opposed to 2 pieces of linen? Is there a real reason for that, or is that just something that somebody started 25 years ago and nobody has ever taken a serious look at? We went through a tremendously careful analysis of weight on the airplanes, and we got a lot of weight off, and weight is very expensive. So to some extent, you can, in fact, eliminate cost if you are prepared to say, look, there aren't any books here that are closed. Anything we do that doesn't make a contribution, we want to get rid of. It isn't done overnight. It takes years. You do it repetitively, every year. And sooner or later, you begin to take out some things that the customer does perceive.
You've been urging for some time that the federal government publish actual airline performance statistics. Why?
Now, the problem is that our business is a very unique one in that you can find out the price of any airline ticket anywhere in the world with a single phone call to a travel agent who uses our reservation system. Now, I can't sell you quality unless you've got some qualitative information to compare. In March of last year, I went down and spent a day at the Department of Transportation and took with me a whole series of pro forma advertisements. So these are the kinds of ads that we would run if we had available competitive data about our competitors. Well, finally, we sold that to the Department of Transportation. They are now putting out a very limited data set, but nevertheless some qualitative information.
Now, what are the lessons that we can learn from Americans' differentiation strategy? Well, the first is that any differentiator starts fundamentally with the problem of creating value for their buyer, and value for all the relevant buyers. In the case of American, it was the traveling public as well as the travel agent. The successful differentiator finds areas of buyer value that the buyer readily perceives and views as the most important. American, for example, was very interested in things like on-time performance and onboard service. Those were the areas that they believed were the most visible, top-of-the-mind areas of buyer value. Now, a differentiator doesn't just create value. A differentiator also has to communicate that they're doing it. And that's why American was so anxious to get the government to publish statistics on things like on-time performance and other measures of airline success. That allowed them to credibly tell their story, to communicate their uniqueness. American also illustrates, however, that being differentiated, being unique, is frequently costly. American was willing to spend extra to be unique in those areas that it judged were very valuable for the customer. Now, that doesn't mean that a differentiator spends freely. American was using aggressive investments in technology, for example, to try to minimize the extra cost of providing all that extra service. So a differentiator tries to find ways of differentiating where the extra cost to them is as little as possible, and even better, where the extra cost to them is less than it would be if a competitor tried to emulate them. Now, American also very vividly illustrates the point that differentiators worry a lot about cost. Remember Bob Crandall's discussion of how they strained to get all the weight off the airplane by taking out anything that didn't really contribute to their quality. American revitalized their entire fleet of aircraft to get fuel-efficient planes and to match the fleet better to the route system. But what American's case illustrates is that eventually, in the pursuit of differentiation, you come to a trade-off between cost and differentiation. And American and other successful differentiators are very clear about how they're going to make that trade-off. Now, a final important lesson about differentiators that American shows very vividly is that to sustain your differentiation, you've got to be a moving target. You can't be standing still because your competitors are going to be constantly trying to emulate what you do.